This is The World Today, giving you a snapshot of the latest developments from around the world. I'm Peninah Karibe. Coming up, Kazakhstan's president says order has mostly been restored amid days of unrest over fuel price hikes. A Russian-led alliance deploys troops to Kazakhstan as part of what it calls a peacekeeping mission. And Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is in Comoros on the final stop of his Africa tour. The president of Kazakhstan has addressed the nation. At the opening of his speech, the president gave a grim order, saying security forces would fire on further demonstrations without further warnings, and said any dialogue with terrorists was stupid. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has thanked Russian President Vladimir Putin for his support and for responding to his request to send peacekeepers. President Tokayev also offered his condolences to the families of victims who died in the chaos. He says demonstrators who met their demands peacefully have already been heard, and added that further violence will be dealt with harshly. Earlier, in a statement, his office said order has mostly been restored in this Central Asian country and that an anti-terrorist operation has been launched. Kazakhstan has faced days of the most violent unrest seen in the country in decades. Observers say rising fuel prices sparked the chaos. Government buildings were stormed and set on fire, and authorities responded with deadly force. Officials say dozens of attackers and 18 police officers have been killed in clashes, hundreds have been injured, and thousands are now arrested. Russia has sent troops to Kazakhstan as deadly riots continue in the city of Almaty. Our correspondent Julia Chapman in Moscow has more on the operations of the peacekeeping forces.
President Tokayev says the CSTO peacekeepers aren't involved in security operations. They're there mostly to help maintain peace and guard critical infrastructure. There are some 2,500 troops on the ground in Kazakhstan. Most of them are Russian, but there are also representatives of the other CSTO members. Only Kyrgyzstan so far hasn't sent any troops because it's been debated in parliament whether or not it is the right move to do so. And certainly this is an unprecedented decision to send CSTO peacekeeping forces into a country. It's the first time in the organization's history that this has happened. There have been 2 requests for support, military support, in the past, about 10 years ago when Kyrgyzstan had its own unrest with widespread protests. The CSTO decided at that time that this was an internal matter, so it didn't deploy forces. And a couple of years ago, during the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Armenia also requested assistance from the CSTO, and that was considered not to be within the remit of the organization. But this time around, a very quick decision was made to send troops into Kazakhstan, and that is partly because the president of Kazakhstan has blamed these protests on external forces. He says that these protesters are externally trained terrorists, and that seems to be the consensus among the CSTO members, who've agreed that Kazakhstan needs protection from external forces, although there doesn't seem to be any evidence on the ground that these protesters are anything other than disgruntled Kazakhs who are very unhappy with the state of things in their country.
Let's head to southwest China, where a rescue mission is underway after a canteen collapsed in Chongqing city. 2 people are dead and more than 20 are believed trapped following a suspected explosion from a gas leak. Authorities say hundreds of rescue workers have been dispatched to the scene. A working group and experts have also been deployed. This is a developing story. We'll provide more details as soon as we get them. The World Health Organization says about 9.5 million new COVID-19 infections were reported globally last week, increasing by 71% from the previous week. The Omicron variant is rapidly spreading in many countries. Early studies show it appears to cause less severe disease compared to Delta, but the World Health Organization officials said even with a reduced risk of hospitalization, Omicron cannot be categorized as mild. The WHO chief has urged global leaders to end vaccine inequality to ensure the world is protected from the pandemic.
Well, his main message being that this pandemic will not end until vaccines are comprehensively rolled out across the world. As you mentioned, this first news conference by the World Health Organization of this year, and following on from what they were trying to say at the end of last year, in that the way out of this crisis is to ensure that 70% of countries' populations are fully vaccinated by the middle of 2022. He argued that vaccine inequity jeopardizes the global economic recovery from COVID-19, also creates the perfect conditions for new variants to emerge. And he says that the dawn of the new year offers an opportunity for leaders across the world to renew their collective response to this shared threat. Now, the European Union says it will donate 700 million doses by the middle of 2022 in order to meet that aim. But about 100 countries across the planet are not on track to meet that target, including the United States, including many across Europe, Asia and much of Africa. Here was the warning that the director of the WHO had a few hours ago.
Booster after booster in a small number of countries will not end a pandemic while billions remain completely unprotected. But we can and must turn it around. In the short term, we can end the acute stage of this pandemic while preparing now for future ones.
A note of optimism perhaps to end on, which is that one senior epidemiologist in Denmark who advises the government suggests that there will be a peak of the Omicron variant in Europe in the next few weeks. And from then on, life may very well continue to resume as it would normally. However, going back to what the WHO said in their news conference, that would apply to Europe only. The way to tackle this pandemic on a global scale is to make sure that everybody in the world is fully vaccinated.
Before heading to Comoros, the Chinese foreign minister was in Kenya. He met President Uhuru Kenyatta in Mombasa. China and Kenya also signed 6 memorandums of understanding touching on trade and infrastructure, among other sectors. The Chinese foreign minister and the Kenyan president also visited the new Kipevu oil terminus. CGTN's Nick Mudimba now reports from Mombasa.
Another sign of fruits of the growing ties between Kenya and China. This is the new Kipevu oil terminus that's being constructed in Mombasa. President Uhuru Kenyatta and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visited the new facility, which, when completed, will double the capacity of transit petroleum products handled there from the current 35,000 tons. It's being financed by the Kenya Ports Authority and constructed by the China Communication Construction Company. The new Kipevu oil terminal will ease operations at the port. More ships will now be able to dock, and of course, without a doubt, oil capacity storage will now be improved. When finished, the new oil terminal will handle up to 4 vessels at a time, up from the current 1 vessel being handled by the old facility.
Today, I want to thank our partners, the People's Republic of China, for being there and walking with us hand in hand and meeting us at our point of need. And I am sure that as we move forward with the kind of pace of development that we now have achieved, we will be able to say we have achieved an end to poverty. Kenya, Africa does not need lectures. Kenya, Africa needs friends willing to work with us to achieve our goals and our aspirations.
Kenya is currently undertaking many infrastructure projects, including major roads, with the support of China. The Chinese foreign minister took issue with false reports surrounding the nature of the funding of such mega projects.
The
so-called debt is certainly not a fact. It is speculation being played out by some with ulterior motives. It's a narration by those who do not want to see development in Africa. If there is any trap, it is poverty and underdevelopment. China would like to welcome other countries friendly towards Africa to eliminate poverty.
But it's not just infrastructure where Kenya has benefited from Chinese support. The health sector too got a boost. Foreign Minister Wang Yi announced a further donation of 10 million vaccines to Kenya, a gift that's been warmly welcomed by the government.
China agreed, I believe, to donate 10 million doses? 10 million doses of vaccine under the planned 1 billion additional doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Africa.
And more cooperation between China and Kenya is the pipeline. The two countries signed 6 memorandums of understanding during Wang Yi's visit, including those touching on infrastructure, trade and investments. 6 Kenyan cabinet secretaries took part in the talks. China has also pledged more support for Kenya and neighboring countries in securing the continent and the Horn of Africa region in particular.
To support the Horn of Africa in realizing long-term security and stability, peace and transparency, China would like to put forward our thinking on peace and development in the Horn of Africa to support regional countries in tackling challenges in 3 areas, namely security, development and governance. We suggest that countries in this region may convene a conference on peace in the Horn of Africa in order to discuss in depth on this matter, to shape political consensus and to coordinate actions. China will appoint a special envoy of the Foreign Ministry on the affairs of Horn of Africa to provide necessary support for this process.
Kenyan avocado farmers are expected to benefit from protocols put in place from the export of the crop to China. Other strategic partnerships that were bolstered during Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit include standing firmly to defeat COVID-19, to defend national sovereignty, continue to engage and play a bigger role for peace and stability in the region, working together to implement the FOCAC pledges and working hand in hand in poverty alleviation. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Mombasa, Kenya.
And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from across Africa on Africa Live. Thank you for watching.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came
tear
in.
gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the
Within
front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has just completed the last leg of his Africa visit. During his visit, discussions centered on enhanced cooperation, COVID-19 and infrastructure development for the three African nations. We take a look at the visit and its significance. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I am Peninah Karibe in Nairobi. Also coming up this hour. In business, Ethiopia's finance ministry seeks approval to increase its budget. And in sports, Newcastle signed Trippier for a 2.5-year deal plus add-ons. It has been an eventful tour for the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. In the last leg of his Africa tour, he visited Comoros. He met with his Comorian counterpart, Diwahir Dul Kamal, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He later headed to the presidential palace to hold further talks with Comorian President Azali Assoumani. Through this visit, China pledged to supply Comoros with as many COVID-19 vaccines as it needs to tackle the pandemic. The two delegations also discussed bilateral ties and the impact of climate change. Comoros and China share a history of mutually beneficial partnerships that they agreed to work on for the benefit of their respective citizens. Let's bring in Wilkista Nyabwa, who has been following that trip for us. She joins us live from Moroni. Wilkista, can you give us an update on that visit by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi in Comoros?
Thank you, Peninah. Well, we'll say that the Chinese Foreign Minister arrived here in Moroni, Comoros on Thursday at about 5 p.m. and set the ball rolling immediately. He did go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs where he met with his Comorian counterpart, and they did hold talks briefly before proceeding to the presidential palace, where they were then able, the foreign minister was then able to meet with the president of Comoros, and then they held lengthier talks then. And after that, they did come out to address the public and indeed the citizens of both their countries, just talking about what they had spoken about and some of the resolutions that they had made. Of course, one of them being the fact that China pledged to provide Comoros with as many vaccines as it needs in order to get to herd immunity. And therefore, this basically means they're really coming in to support basically Comoros as it grapples with COVID-19 in a really big way. But they did also speak about other issues such as infrastructure development, and they spoke about their long shared history and their friendly relations, and that why it is important to just build up on that for the benefit of their citizens. So those were some of the things that they discussed during those about 3 to 4 hours yesterday after the foreign minister arrived here in Comoros.
All right, Wilkista, so you did mention China's pledge to supply Comoros with as many COVID-19 vaccines as it needs. How is the country coping with the COVID-19 pandemic, and how significant is China's support?
Well, Peninah, I will say that Comoros has had a good start. Last year, we did see also China supporting them as they kicked off their vaccine program. And therefore, we have seen, even going around the city, the capital city, is that now people are beginning, the uptake has been really quite good, and the attitude around it as well. And we are seeing a number of establishments now getting comfortable to ask members of the public not just to take precautions such as wearing masks or, using hand sanitizers, but also asking them to provide their vaccine certificates before accessing certain venues. And we have seen members of the public also just being very open to inquiring about vaccines and whether more would be available. So we would say that the fight against COVID-19 here in Comoros is basically ongoing, that there's a lot of knowledge, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of awareness, and people are open to getting vaccinated, and therefore having more vaccines would really help the country to tackle COVID-19.
All right, Wilkista, we appreciate the update. Thank you very much. Wilkista Nyabwa live for us in Moroni. Meanwhile, CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a deeper look at areas of cooperation and support between China and the three African nations.
The Africa Tour, a 3-decade-old tradition that sees Chinese foreign ministers visit Africa as their first overseas trip of the year, began with a visit to Eritrea on January 4th. While there, Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki and pledged China's support for Eritrea's efforts to safeguard its sovereignty. Later, after a meeting with Eritrean Foreign Minister Osman Saleh, the two diplomats issued a joint statement on consolidating bilateral strategic partnership.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
In Kenya, Wang Yi met with President Uhuru Kenyatta and was the chief guest during a tour of an offshore oil terminal built by a Chinese company in the port city of Mombasa. Kenyatta praised China's sincerity as a development partner. On international affairs, Kenyatta said Kenya would work with China to promote a just and fair system by collaborating within the framework of the UN Security Council.
Our partnership with China is not a partnership based on China telling us what we need. It is a partnership of friends working together to meet Kenya's social-economic agenda.
We are here to witness the genuine and sincere friendship between China and Africa. Over 600 years ago, the famous navigator Zheng He led the biggest fleet at the time to pay a visit to Mombasa. What he presented to the local community was friendship and trust instead of colonialism and slavery.
Earlier, following a meeting with Kenya's Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary Rachel Omamo, Wang Yi announced China would provide the East African country with 10 million COVID-19 vaccine doses. 6 MOUs and agreements were signed on trade, investments, infrastructure, digital information and green development. The last leg of his tour saw Wang Yi visit the Comoros Islands. During a joint press briefing with Foreign Minister Doihir Dul Kamal, he pledged China would offer the island as many COVID-19 vaccines as needed. He also met with President Azali Assoumani, where they discussed bilateral cooperation. Robert Magila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, it has been an eventful tour for Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Let's cross over to Beijing to get reactions of his African tour. Over to Xie Cheng. Okay.